Welcome to this new episode of the Cota podcast. Today we have Hossein Moiin. Hossein is an incredible entrepreneur, executive. He had great roles at many companies, mostly in the telecommunication industry. He has been very involved with the 5G, even in terms of some of the specifications and the definitions and the agreements among large companies internationally. And he's also one of the operating partners at Cota Capital. Hossein, welcome to this show. Very good to see you again.
Thank you very much, Simone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our chat, which I hope will cover some elements of 5G that maybe is a bit unclear to the general population.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we're going to get there, but first I want to make sure that the audience can know who you are, because now that I know you, I met you, several months ago through Bobby, one of the two founders of Cota Capital, Bobby Yazzani. But when I met you, I was really impressed with your background, and I think it's important that the audience knows who you are and what you did. Maybe we can start with your latest few years, even before we go back to the beginning of your career. So what has been the most important thing that you've been involved in the last few years that people should be aware of?
So I have been in the last 3 years, I have been involved in a number of initiatives and activities, mostly around building 5G networks. I have a lab in San Jose with a very old and dear friend where we actually build 5G radio, 5G core, in order to be able to test various components of this. In addition to having this lab and playing for clients, of course, with 5G, I have been advising a number of companies on their 5G strategies. Yeah, that includes some large blue chip companies as well as some startups. And that has been the last 2.5 years of my career.
Nice.
It's been exciting. It's been very entrepreneurial. But at the same time, it has also been somewhat tiring because you are on 24/7.
Yes, that's the usual, the plus and minus. If you want to work on exciting things, you have to accept the fact that it's going to be very demanding on your time and your schedule and everything else. And before that, you also had very important roles. For example, you were the CTO of Nokia, or Nokia, as some people call it here in the US, for a number of years. And you had other very important roles at Nokia. But you also been involved in the telecommunication industry for a long time. In fact, you have a technical background. You even have a PhD. I believe the PhD you took it at UC Santa Barbara, if I'm not mistaken. That's also why, and so you have a technical background, and somehow you saw a lot of what happened in the tech industry, particularly in the telecommunication industry. What is your main takeaway of what you've seen in the last 20 years, given that you were also an executive at those large companies? What did you see happen that is very important and maybe not obvious to the audience?
I think one of the key changes that I have seen is the fact that the most innovative activities have always been, for the first 20, maybe 15 years of my career, on the enterprise side. But now that I look at it, I realize that maybe the consumer side is the most innovative sector that we see. The other key thing that I've noticed, and this is very good for me personally, is that technology became cool. It was actually a very geeky pursuit in the earlier days of my career. But now you can say with pride and puff up your chest and say, I'm in technology. It used to be, oh, I'm in technology. So I think the fact that we are becoming more and more technology centric is also another aspect. So technology is now in all domains of life, and this to me is phenomenal. As I see around me how many gadgets I have and how many connectivity connections each one has, this is becoming quite interesting because I think we are at the cusp of something great. I don't know exactly what it is, but I call it the connected intelligence, where everything and everyone gets connected. And there is hopefully a good outcome for all of us.
That's nice. I like it a lot, the connected intelligence. I think it's a very dense way to capture what's going on in the world right now, because there is intelligence, and there has been for a while, even in terms of intelligent systems, software or IT devices, but it's connected more than ever now. And we saw with the internet, this is very obvious now, but in the early 90s, a lot of people didn't really understand what the internet was for. Why did we need to be connected all together? Because somehow it was hard for us to predict what an increased connectivity would have brought to the world. And we now see, now it's obvious, of course. Now in retrospect, it's easy to say, of course, the internet changed everything, changed most, if not all, industries. Maybe oil and gas did not change as much as others, but in general, every industry has been touched by the fact that we are connected. But before we get there, because then 5G, of course, is a hot topic. As you know, with Cota Capital, we had a recent panel about 5G with Amazon, Verizon, and then two startups in which Cota invested, Quadric and Movandi. And you've been involved with, I think, with both of them, if I'm not mistaken, and you know them well. But also, 5G is the topic I want to cover with you from a technical standpoint today. But before we get there, let's take a step back. So you were born in Iran in the 60s, if I'm allowed to say that.
Yes, you are allowed to say that.
And then as a teenager, if I'm not mistaken, you left Iran and you essentially ended up in the US, studied here, and then worked here. So your professional career has always been in the US. Can you tell us a bit about those early days in your career when you were a young, PhD or an engineer, and you were moving your first steps into the IT, enterprise IT world of the 80s and 90s, which was not, as you were saying, it was not sexy as it is today. It was very weird and dark and obscure. So how was that time, and what did you do there?
So let me, first of all, I came to the US in the late 70s, and I was a high school student. I finished my high school in Santa Barbara and went to university in Santa Barbara and got my PhD in Santa Barbara. Once I finished my PhD in 92, I joined a company called Tandem Computers. And Tandem Computers built highly available fault-tolerant systems for financial sector as well as for telecommunication sector. And my role was in the core of the operating system. I was responsible for managing time and memory. And I remember that it was a very, I wouldn't say dark, I would say individualistic pursuit. So back then, the notion of collaboration and team working was pretty much new. So I would do most of the time, I would be alone and with my terminal and my server somewhere back in the office, writing code. And it was funny because Tandem had its own programming language called Tandem Application Language, TAL, which I don't know why anybody would write in that language, but it was the way it was. It was a fully vertically integrated system. And I had a little piece of the core of the operating system, and then people would build on top of it, but they would build everything. And I was actually building on top of a microprocessor that somebody else had designed. So this was a fully vertically integrated system, worked beautifully, but worked very slowly.
Okay.
I remember one thing, which was a lesson that I'll never forget, which was a quality lesson, but also a lesson about timing. I was asked to write a piece of code for managing the time between two different machines and synchronizing the time. And it was a complex problem. So I asked from my manager, how much time do I have and how many people will be working with me? And the answer was, oh, take as much time as you need because the quality is what matters. And there is no one else but you. I said, but this is a big task. It's going to take years. They said, that, yeah, we know, but we don't want anyone else to work with you because then you have an interface and that causes the quality to go down. So two things stood out for me. One was, yeah, it took me a long time to do this. B, there were companies that really cared about quality at that much. But then I realized after leaving Tandem in the mid 90s that maybe that was not the best solution because Tandem doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So maybe there is a balance between quality and timeliness. And I learned that, maybe sometimes good enough is really good enough. You don't really need the best. And that
This
was
is
the lesson of my first job in the computing industry.
This is very interesting, also from my perspective. So I'm a bit younger than you, I can say that. But I also had exposure to some of those environments in the late 90s. For example, I did my military service in Italy, I grew up there. And luckily for me, instead of doing the usual military stuff, I ended up at the Ministry of Defense as an analyst and programmer. It was a very interesting experience, especially because I managed to meet other people way smarter than me and way more proficient with computer systems. Back then, I was an engineering student, not a computer science student. Then I switched. And I was working on IBM machines, and we were using 4GL, which is fourth generation languages. In principle, it is very similar to TAL and other initiatives. I would say most companies like Tandem, like IBM, like the companies there almost do not exist anymore, with a few
Yeah,
exceptions. They always had this vertical integration, and everything was somehow slow. Everything was compartmentalized. Collaboration was not particularly thriving. And in a way, I always think of these companies as the hardware company, where hardware is at the center of everything and
yeah,
software is an afterthought. Whereas I think the 90s with the internet brought in a new, fresh wave of entrepreneurs and teamwork approaches that
yeah.
somehow changed this. And what you say, the fact that collaboration is key, today it would be unthinkable to assign a project to a brilliant person like you, but to say you're alone. And if you have
Yes,
another team member, it would just add overhead. So you just need to do this by yourself. It doesn't work this way anymore, thankfully.
no, that's really true. And I think that the shift from a hardware centric to a programmable world is very pronounced. And it's actually one of the things that we can talk about when we discuss what is happening in the world of telecommunication, because telecommunication is one of the last, or was one of the last, strongholds of this hardware centric view of the world.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. So I think a question that some of our listeners would have for you, because most of the people that listen to this are technical people, entrepreneurs or ex-entrepreneurs, sometimes VCs, investors. There's always this big question about how does an engineer, a technical person, go from an individual contributor role, like the one you had at Tandem, to
Right.
becoming the leader of large teams at large companies. What did you do after Tandem, and how did you end up becoming this, very well respected and influential executive at large companies, large telecommunication companies?
So I think what happened was opportunity happened. After Tandem, I was recruited by Sun Microsystems to lead a smaller team to build a clustered system in the labs. And at the same time, I also started taking classes for management because I quickly realized that actually I do like to work with people. I like to have teams around me. And there's a quality of leadership that you cannot really identify precisely, but you know that this is something that you want to do. And you think that you have the ability to motivate others to follow you. And that's what I felt maybe in the mid 90s. And I was given an opportunity in Sun Microsystems to do that. And in 97, I was offered a role in England, in outside of London, to lead a team to build a fault-tolerant platform for Sun Microsystems. And I actually took that opportunity, and that's how I shifted from a purely individual contributor to somebody who's still technical, who still does the architecting work, but is also responsible for a smaller team. And the team was pretty small. It was maybe around 6 people, 7 people. And I went to the management track, if you will, where I was given access to a lot of management courses, management tools. Sun had a very good university, internal university at the time. And that's how it began. And then years go by, you change jobs, you change companies, and you gain more responsibilities, et cetera, until one day you find you're leading a team of thousands of engineers and scientists, and you realize, wow, that is neat.
Yes. So tell us a bit about your experience at Nokia. By the way, do you prefer to call it Nokia or Nokia?
Nokia.
Okay, because when I was in the US in the early 2000s, of course, coming from Europe, I would say Nokia, and Nokia was the big brand in Europe back then for
Or
cell phones. I mean, everywhere in the world, including Europe. And I came to the US, and someone told me, well, first of all, I kept hearing Nokia, 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 and I thought it was weird. Someone told me, maybe you know if this is true or not, that the marketing guys at Nokia, sorry, decided to make it call Nokia in the US to make it sound Japanese as opposed to Finnish, because they thought that a Finnish company would have not had the right, let's say, reputation. But I don't know if it's an urban legend or if there's something true to it. Maybe you know, maybe you don't.
I really don't know about that, but I don't believe that would be the case because Nokia is a very proud company that is proud of its Finnish heritage. So while it's a truly global company
Of course.
in many countries,
So
it is.
tell us your experience about your experience there. So you had a very important role, and
So I'll tell you about what happened.
yeah,
Uh, I was actually recruited from BT, the British operator,
yeah,
it's mobile now, to become the CTO of not Nokia, but Nokia-Siemens networks. In the 2000s, there were, at the beginning of that decade, there were many companies that built equipment for vendors, for the operators. There were many vendors that built equipment for mobile operators, for fixed operators. Some of them were actually based in North America. We can think of companies like Lucent Technologies or Nortel. Now, what happened in the 2000s was there was a lot of mergers, a lot of acquisitions. The other one that was here, obviously, was Motorola. And Nokia and Siemens were two of the larger organizations, and they decided to join forces together in order to provide better service to their customers and also make better sense of the financials. So it was a very large company with more than 80,000 employees, and they were seeking a CTO to lead their evolution into the next generation of technologies. I was involved in LTE, so they knew me and they asked me to join them, which I did. I was based in Helsinki, Finland, quite a interesting place. I'm not sure if you've been, but
I've been a few times, yes.
yes, it's an interesting, it's a otherworldly. And I was there for 5 years. And I was leading the team that would do the research, that would create and monetize intellectual property, and would do the standardization of the technologies. So this was a team of about 1,000 scientists and engineers, more than half of them with PhDs. And my role was to provide the vision and to provide the overall direction that the company would be heading in the next generation. And when I joined in 2010, and it may sound strange, but actually the very first thing that I thought about was, what are we going to do for 5G? And that's a decade before actually 5G was visible to the general public as it is today.
But in a way, this is also right, because in 2010, 4G was essentially just being rolled out.
Exactly.
And so there was not a lot you could do, or maybe, let's say, in your role, there were easier or more straightforward things that you could do in relation to 4G. But given that you were there as a visionary, as a futurist in a way, they were asking you, help us imagine what's coming next. And 5G was the next thing to come, even though if it was 10 years in the making, as every generation of, G stands for generation, in fact. Every new generation of cell phone networks is about 10 years apart, ballpark.
It does take about a decade for a new generation to arrive. And you're absolutely right that in 2010, we were very beginning of deployment of LTE. I think Verizon had deployed in the US in 2009. And there was talk of Apple doing a iPhone for 4G or LTE. So there was a lot of hype in that domain. And while there's a lot of hype there, we as a research and standardization unit, we needed to worry about what's next. So you need to have a clear vision about what happens in 2020. And that it was actually the project that I undertook with some of my head of research and head of standardization to look at what will be in 2020. And remarkably, a lot of our concepts and ideas have come to fruition, but also some of them were completely maybe undervalued, some of the concepts, and the others were definitely overvalued. So as a futurist, you always learn that you get a lot of things wrong, but maybe the gist of what you're doing, the broad theme, is right. So when I got there, my goal was to do two things. One was to evolve LTE, and the other one was to make sure that we have 5G, very focused effort in 5G. And very soon, we started working with universities and other institutions that have maybe more academic freedom to think beyond the immediate, because even though I had this role, I still had to also evolve LTE and bring new technologies to the production teams. So I was not as free to do what I wanted to do as academics would be. Yeah. So we sponsored academic research in various universities, et cetera, et cetera.
Nice. I have another question in relation to that period, because we know very well now that in 2007, the iPhone was introduced. Funny enough, 2007 was also the best year for Nokia, the company, in terms of revenues, growth, etc. So the impact of the iPhone arrived from 2008, 2009, and then especially from 2009 onwards. You arrived in a company that was starting to feel some struggle because their dominance of the cell phone market was being challenged by Apple. And when you arrived, I'm pretty sure that they were fully aware that this was going to be an uphill battle. Can you tell us a bit about what the atmosphere was in relation to competition from Apple, but in general, the fact that the company, Nokia, had a huge valuation, a huge market cap. It was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the most valuable telecommunication company in the world back then. And then things started to go south in terms of
Yeah.
stock
Yeah.
value and everything else. How did you live this? What was the atmosphere? What was the reaction? What happened in this very peculiar European Finnish company?
So, just to be clear, I was not part of the Nokia mothership,
Yes, yes,
the joint venture with Siemens, Nokia-Siemens networks. But I had a seat where I could have a vantage point, and
yes,
I could see what was happening. I think Nokia was caught off guard by the arrival of iPhone. And I think the vision of Nokia for a handset was more or less centered around a mobile phone. So the key word there is phone. And I think they were very much worried about the quality of calls. They were worried about the clarity of voice. And from what I understand and understood back then, they did not see the shift from a phone to a command and control center, which
yeah,
is what the modern phone is all about.
yeah,
They did not really understand that shift. And by the time they caught that shift, it was maybe too late. So it was maybe 2012 or 2011 that they decided, oh, yes, we have to do something. We have to, because actually many of the notions that exist today, Nokia was the inventor of those
yes,
notions. And yet they did not get the reward or just reward for inventing it because they were too slow and they were too successful. And that's a big issue. When you're successful in doing something, a little pesky company in Cupertino will not bother you. And when it starts to bother you, it's too late.
that's true.
So this is the real challenge that Nokia had. And here we are today
Yeah.
in 2010, 2020, and we see that Nokia made some significant errors of judgment.
Yeah, and to be fair, it would have not been easy for any company. I mean, I don't think even Microsoft laughed at the iPhone when it first came out.
Yeah.
So it's not easy to realize that there is this big market shift, and what Apple did with the iPhone is pretty unique in the technology history. Let me switch to something less related to large companies and executive roles and large teams, because you've also been involved in startups in multiple roles and multiple ways. And it's probably, it would take too long to cover everything, but maybe you can pick one particular startup that is very dear to your heart that you've been involved with. Can you tell us a bit of how you got involved, what your role was, and what was the startup about?
So I'll go back to my involvement as a board member of Ruckus, who makes Wi-Fi equipment. They are now under the Harris brand, I believe. And my involvement started with the venture capitalist who was invested in them, and he asked me to join the board. I accepted, and I have to say, seeing, because at the same time I was with Nokia, I was actually doing this other job for Ruckus Wireless, and seeing how different the small company operates compared to this large, ginormous ship of Nokia was the most insightful learning of my career, because you can see how quickly they can pivot, how quickly they can make decisions, how quickly they can go after different markets and different opportunities, and comparing and contrasting it to Nokia was quite enlightening. Because in Nokia, to do anything, you need committees. And maybe this is the right process for a large company, but it does give you a real disadvantage when you're competing against a small company like Ruckus. Now, I have to say that learning that lesson has made me much more a fan of small teams, agile development techniques, and innovation-centric companies. So to me, the lesson from startup is do things fast, maybe not the highest quality, but do them fast and see what it means and see what it impacts. And then you can improve on it.
Yeah, of
So this
course.
DevOps is one of the key learning lessons that I've learned from the Silicon Valley and the startup community.
And maybe before we start talking about technology, or we go deeper into technical stuff, given that you managed small and large teams, and you've been and you are board member of several companies, so you saw firsthand how effective or maybe less effective CEOs or executives at startups have been.
Right.
Is there I know this could be a big topic, but is there one or two key takeaways that are not obvious that you realized over the years about how to effectively lead and manage a not too large team, let's say tens of people? What's the secret that you have identified? When you see that thing, you say, okay, these guys are doing it right because those are the right foundations to manage and lead a team of people.
I think the key for me is having a strong belief in what you do and being a role model by doing what is expected of you. So I remember very clearly the CEO of Ruckus as being exactly that, that she was, and she's a well-known individual in Silicon Valley, but Selena was always walking the walk, believed in what was going on in the company, had a very good understanding of what everyone was able to contribute, and getting the best out of people. To me, that's a team of maybe 100 people, 150 people at the beginning. So it wasn't a huge team, but she really made it a point to know everyone and make sure that everything that goes on there is something that she's fully conscious of. And she really demonstrated her belief in the product, her belief in the superiority of the product. And to me, that was really enlightening and really inspirational, because you don't see that with the CEOs of large organizations. They are much more politicians than advocates. And that is really needed from for a startup. What you really need is you need a real advocate,
Absolutely.
a politician to be a.
I agree with that, and I sympathize with that. I agree with you. Let's talk about 5G now. And I think it's interesting to start from one of the critiques that people have moved against 5G, because we've been hearing about 5G for a while. And you and I know a bit more than the usual average person out there about 5G. But the average person has been hearing about 5G for at least 2 years, maybe even
Right.
2.5. And now, last week the iPhone 12 was announced and it has full 5G capabilities, supposedly. So it is almost like a turning point now. But sometimes I keep hearing this term called 5G fatigue, meaning that people have been hearing so much about 5G that the hype has been substituted with disillusionment almost. But we both know that there are many concrete technical innovations in 5G that deserve attention. So,
Yeah.
what can we say to technical people that think, oh, 5G is just a lot of hype? I've been waiting for this to happen for 2 years and nothing happened so far. What can we tell them from a technical standpoint to reassure them that this is a really important, technological change?
That's a deep and good question because I think we've been here before. So I'm old enough to remember 3G when there was a tremendous amount of hype about internet, about mobile internet, if you recall. And what happened was people got really tired of it. We had the bust of 2001, and then followed by the fact that many companies in Europe, in particular, paid a hefty price for their licenses, and nothing was seemed to happen. So what happened was that actually maybe 3G did not happen in 2001, 2002. It happened in 2005, 2006. And it was really not complete until LTE came around in 2010. My point being is, yes, there is the marketing machine that creates this fatigue, but there are fundamental technology advances in 5G as they were in LTE and 3G that deserve their day in the sun. Now, when this will happen, in my opinion, is a bit out there. And the reasons are the same as always been. It takes time. So I think technologists are very optimistic about the short-term impact of their technology, but rather miss the boat when we're talking about the long-term impact. So I go back to LTE. You cannot imagine having Uber without LTE. It
Absolutely.
would not work on a GSM or a 3G. So a company this size, this magnitude, Lyft is the same. Or even doing search on Google, most of it is now on mobile. So, and on mobile networks. So what we see is this had a huge impact, but it took time. So yes, there is fatigue. There are usual suspects of spectrum, right amount of spectrum in the right frequencies. The usual suspect of deploying on the towers. These are the kind of things that take time, and you cannot really hurry them. So I think one of the things I'm excited about personally is next month or in 2 months actually, we will have an auction for C-band. C-band is the frequency between 3.5, including CBRS, and 4.2, and we will have an auction, and hopefully that will allow a real transformational 5G to come to the United States. Some countries in Europe have already auctioned it, and I think while I sympathize with the fatigue, I just want people to hold off and wait for maybe another year or two before they judge 5G as a success or failure.
I agree. And in fact, most people don't realize that 5G has a vast increase in bands available. Not just the 3.5 gigahertz that you were just mentioning now, but even the 25, 30 gigahertz and above, which, of course, as we all know, or at least we should know, the higher the frequency, the higher the bandwidth, but also the shorter the distance you can travel,
Yes.
by being able to communicate. This means that if you have enough towers, enough stations to communicate, you can actually leverage higher frequencies to have much faster connections between devices, between cell phones, but also IoT. So there's a lot of things that are just around the corner. And I agree with you that this fatigue should somehow, it is legit, but at the same time, good things are coming.
Yes, I agree. I blame marketing. For example, one of the companies, operators in the United States, had 5GE which I never understood what the E even stands for. But it's like estimated 5G,
I think it was supposed to be enhanced, which
enhanced.
is just marketing. There's no
It's really
technical.
hard because you look at your phone and go, "Oh, I have 5G, but my phone is not capable of 5G. So how come I have a 5G enhanced and not even 5G, but enhanced 5G?"
Yes.
So a lot of the blame is not on us technologists, but on those folks in the marketing departments.
Yeah, that's true. Let's talk about two things now. One, I think you are an expert in ORAN, Open Radio Access Network. So maybe we can talk about that in relation to 5G. And then we can talk about deployments, which is also another area that you know very well. So can you tell us in general, what is ORAN? Why do you think it's important? Why 5G is an opportunity in specific to this? So tell us a bit about this.
So ORAN stands for Open Radio Access Network. And what it does, it goes back to my earliest comment regarding tandem. It actually horizontalizes a vertically integrated solution. So traditionally, base stations that are the radio unit of the mobile network are composed of a baseband unit and a radio unit. And these two are tightly integrated. There's an interface between the two of them called CPRI in LTE. And now with Open Radio Access Network, what we've done is we've opened that interface. So it's no longer just between Nokia and Nokia, but it could be Nokia and Ericsson or Nokia and Samsung or other smaller companies like Altiostar or Mavenir. And what that actually does, it creates a baseband unit made up of distributed unit and control unit that is software centric as opposed to being hardware centric. They would run on common off the shelf platforms, on COTS. And the radio unit now is the one that has the hardware in it. So that is the one that you would actually go and put up in the tower. But now you're connected through this eCPRI to the distributed unit. And what you just did is you created two different innovation cycles. One innovation cycle for the software, which can be much faster, and one innovation cycle for hardware, which is less agile. And what I really like is that now you can actually create new services, new things much more rapidly. I think this is fundamental in a number of dimensions. One of the key dimensions is that you open up competition, and that's important. In particular, in today's bipolar world, we really need to have this additional tool. And the other thing is you can actually reduce the cost by reducing how many times you actually go to change things, because now most of your stuff is in a central location and you can actually manage it like that. So I'm really excited about ORAN. I think it has a lot of potential. There are a number of companies that have already implemented ORAN, including one in Japan, Rakuten, which actually has a 4G and now a 5G technology based on ORAN. Now, you also asked about deployment.
Yes.
I think deployment is a very challenging topic for operators. It is the thing that costs the most. It is something that you need to be very conscious of, and you need to begin with the right frequency. So you were right that there are multiple frequency domains. So at the very low end, we have 600 megahertz that people are using for 5G. This is great frequency for IoT, for going indoors, but it doesn't have enough bandwidth to really be very capable. Then we look at mid-band, where hopefully we will get a lot of megahertz, many megahertz in the 3.7 to 4.2 in the coming auction. And then maybe even combining with lower bands to provide the coverage. So then you have a good coverage and very capable system. at the mid band, and this is the transformational power of 5G comes really true at mid band. Most countries are focusing on this exact point. And I think US will do well if it also started to focus more and more on this band. So we saw a preview of it with the CBRS auction in the summer. And last but not least, we'll have high frequency in millimeter wave domain. So in Europe is 24, here is 28 and 39 gigahertz, where you're very coverage challenged, but you have a lot of capacity. So this is useful for it's very dense urban areas as well as indoor factories, etc., where you can use repeaters to go around the corner, etc. And I think that each one of these three domains, millimeter wave, mid-band, and low band, have a look, place, and use in 5G. And I think all three of them, when combined, will give you the transformational power of 5G, which can then hopefully overcome this 5G fatigue.
That's very good. And it's also interesting that by combining essentially three bands, you can take advantage of the physical characteristics of these three bands, because low bands, long distance, but low bandwidth. But they can go through walls. They are largely unaffected by weather, like rain or fog.
Yeah.
Whereas the high band is the opposite. Very high throughput, but some rain or a wall can actually stop the signal or reduce the quality of the signal. And the fact that you can dynamically combine these three different bands together means that from a user experience perspective, you might have degradation of bandwidth and signal, but at the same time, some basic services and some basic functionalities will always be there, which means it's more reliable, which means that people would appreciate the fact that there is this new technology, this new generation that gives them overall a better experience in doing whatever they need to do. And also, I think most people don't realize that 5G, in my view, and I'm curious to hear your point of view on this. In my view, 5G is also a lot about IoT and connected things, as opposed to 4G, which was mostly about connecting people and their devices together. Would you agree with this, or what would be your comment on this?
I think you're right. LTE was designed with mobile broadband as its core use case. 5G is designed with three very diverse use cases. One is, yes, improving on the mobile broadband, so evolution of LTE story. But the other two are about massive machine-to-machine communication, and the other one is critical communication, where you need low latency and very high reliability. So I think the IoT is one of the three main legs of 5G stool. And I think this is critical to realize that it is not just about mobile broadband, but it's about connecting all these billions of sensors and actuators that we will have all around us. So 5G enables that. And I think this is something that is not bolted on like we did with LTE. So in LTE, we have a narrow band LTE as one of the enhancements in release 14. But now we will see built in and designed in support for billions of devices. So yes, 5G will address IoT in a meaningful manner.
And this brings me to the last part of our conversation. I'm very curious, and I would guess our audience is also curious to see your point of view on what are the opportunities for startups in particular, not for large companies, but startups that are operating in this space. I would divide them in two categories. One is maybe specific to the actual technology and devices that are used by 5G, and Movandi and Quadric are two good examples there. But then I think that there is a second category which is companies that could exist only because 5G is out there. So companies that build products that are enabled by 5G and that otherwise could not exist.
Right.
What would be, and this is a wild guess, so we're just playing a game, so you're not going to be held accountable for any bad prediction, but what is, in your view, what are, in your view, the most exciting things that would happen in these two buckets, if you agree with the categorization that I'm just using?
So I really like the way you broke it down. Yes, there will be one on the infrastructure side, companies like Movandi, also on device side, companies that will build, for example, specific devices, sensors, actuators for specific applications. And then the other ones will be companies that exist because of 5G, and those will be mostly application. I think if we really want to look at the opportunities, we need to consider IoT and critical communication as the two domains that will probably be relevant. I think in the enhanced mobile broadband category, maybe the opportunities will lie in the AR, VR for consumers and devices that are built there, as well as improving the coverage of millimeter wave. That would be a big advantage. So Movandi does that, as an example. So we think that that is an area of innovation. But beyond infrastructure, I think the 5G applications in healthcare, I would say that is very relevant. It will be probably one of the most relevant. Logistics would be another one. So autonomous driving gets a interesting rap, but in reality, autonomous driving, we're not just talking about Teslas and real cars, but also on small delivery machines. I've seen a couple of startups in this domain that they have last mile delivery, for instance. And now with COVID, that's becoming very hot topic. But now with 5G, you have opportunities in that domain, create new delivery vehicles, etc. But I also like to say that another domain where there might be a lot of opportunities is the intersection of this new network with other technologies. So one of the key ones being artificial intelligence and machine learning, deep learning type. So in that intersection, there should be opportunities to take advantage of for small startups. And then I would say maybe if you look at robotics and 5G, there's an opportunity in that domain. We talked about a little bit about the last mile delivery, but factory automation is another area where we can say 5G plus robotics. So I think that combination of things coming together is also the fruitful area to take a look at and see where 5G leads. In my view, 5G enables many things, and we will be really limited by only our own imagination. So my ask from the audience is, do not limit your imagination. If you can dream it, it can probably be built.
Nice, that's very beautiful. Last thing I want to ask you, you are now, among other things, also an operating partner at Cota Capital. I'm curious to hear your story of how you got to know Bobby Yazzani, and what are you doing with Cota Capital these days? What's your focus on?
So I met Bobby through a common friend more than 5 years ago, and immediately I took a shine to him. He's a very charismatic leader, and it became very obvious that we can have a deep relationship, which we developed over the years. And I joined Cota Capital only last month as a result of a number of talks, because we, both Bobby and myself, and also other people inside the company like yourself, feel that there's an opportunity with 5G. And we think that there's an opportunity for the infrastructure to be redone, for the applications to be retaught. So we decided to join forces. And what I'm doing is, at the moment, looking, besides education, I'm also looking at writing a manifesto on what we will do together. And actually, you're part of this group
Yes.
on how we can take advantage of the opportunities that this new era is bringing to us. And what is it that our core values and core beliefs are. So this is what I'm doing for Cota at the moment, as
Nice.
well as participating in some of the meetings and seeing if I can lend my expertise to the company.
Beautiful. And then, as a last thing, before you can share your parting thoughts, I want to share with the audience that you also have a fond relationship with Italy as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a bit about that, just as a
Well,
personal note?
I think I fell in love with Italy the first time I went there. That was when I was a child as a tourist. And throughout the years, I kept my love for the country and for its people. In fact, I was married to an Italian woman for a number of years. We're no longer married, but I have two sons, 20 and 18, that are living in Italy, one in Milano and another in Bologna. One is going to university, the other one is last year of high school. And my passion for all things Italian is limitless. So, yes, I am an Italian fan
I
of
had to
Italy.
ask you that, of course. I know that you had to deal with Italy also from a business perspective occasionally. And I can
Yes,
imagine it was less pleasant than your other memories or your other interactions with Italy.
yes, I lived in Italy for a number of
Yeah,
years.
exactly.
I commuted to London and Finland. So, yes, I had to deal with some of the business aspects of Italy. And maybe it is not the most efficient way to deal with things. But I also learned that there are many ways to deal with any issue. And I like the Italian way. It's more relaxed. It's
Absolutely.
more it's more calming, shall we say.
Yeah, that's true. Any parting thoughts for our audience? Anything you want to share before we wrap up?
I think my last thought is that we are entering a new era, and I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities that we can capture in this new era. So my ask from the audience is to start imagining and dreaming. And hopefully, together with Kota, we can make your dreams come true because your dreams are also our dreams.
Nice. Thank you very much, Hossein. Thanks for being with me and to spend your time to record this. Hope to
It was
see you
my,
soon in person.
yes, likewise. I look forward to it.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.